thank you for being with me, Stephen Barr, and it's it's really great to have you here talking with me for a number of reasons, and one of them being the great work that you've done on the harmony of faith and science. That's been really particularly helpful to me. And before we get into that, though, why don't we just tell us a little bit about who you are and your scientific background.
Okay, my name is Stephen Barr, or Stephen M. Barr for the full name. And my background, I'm a cradle Catholic, that's my spiritual background. And I'm a physicist, and I think you might say a cradle physicist, since as long as I can remember, I knew I was going into some kind of theoretical science. And so I have a PhD in theoretical particle physics from Princeton University. It was in 1978, a long time ago. And I did research in particle physics for over 40 years. And I'm retired now and devoting my time entirely to science faith activities.
Yeah, so one of the big projects that you've been working on has been the Society of Catholic Scientists. Tell us a little bit about your work there and that organization.
Right, so we, summer of 2016, a small group of us, there were 6 of us, decided to found the Society of Catholic Scientists. And it was an idea that sort of in the back of my mind is something that may be a good idea to do at some point. But I don't think I really planned to do it or really thought I would ever do it. But I met electronically Jonathan Lunine, who's an eminent astrophysicist, a convert to the faith, who's at Cornell University. And he mentioned to me the possibility of starting a Society of Catholic Scientists. And I said, I've actually sort of been thinking about that for many years. And he said, why don't we join forces and do it? And so he was sort of the one who said, let's do it. And we did it. And started with six of us friends, and didn't know where it would go or how it would turn out. But one thing led to another, and we're up now to over 2,000 members. And I think we have at least one member in 65 or 70 countries, and we've been going great guns. So it's really taken off. So much more than I thought it would.
Yeah, and we're right at the tail end of a conference. That was another wonderful annual conference in the SCS. Lots of great talks.
I enjoy them immensely, and a number of young people came up to me, said how much they enjoy it, and it is a lot of fun, I must say. Conferences have generally turned out very well. I'm very pleased how this one turned out also. Yeah, so I retired from, I was a professor of physics at the University of Delaware. I have been since 1987. And after a few years of running the SCS, it got big enough and there was more and more to do there that I thought, I really can't do an honest day's work as a professor of physics and teaching my classes and doing research and doing this at the same time. So I said it's time for me to retire from my professor position, which I did, devoting full time to science faith activities. So I say to people I'm working harder now than I did when I was a professor, but that's probably more a statement about how lazy I was as a faculty member.
Now, one of the things that I've got here is your book, Modern Physics and Ancient Faith.
Yep.
What year was this released again?
2003. Anyway, so I retired in 2020. But so actually I got into doing things about science and faith in a somewhat accidental way. So I read a book back in 1995 that it got me very excited. I thought it was a very important book, and it was by a great mathematician who wrote a book arguing that the human mind is not just a machine. It's a very timely topic with AI and so on. But this is back in 1995. And so he was arguing that whatever the human mind is, it is not just the operation of a computer. And he had some very interesting arguments, and I got excited about this book, and I wrote a review of it and submitted it to a journal called First Things, not expecting that they would accept it. But I submitted it anyway, and they did accept it. And then I started writing for First Things on a regular basis, and so I wrote dozens of articles and book reviews. And after a certain point, I thought to myself, well, I'm doing all this writing, and I'm also in the process reading a lot of what people are saying because I'm reviewing books, both atheist books and religious books from a religious perspective. And so that gave me a better sense of the lay of the land. And so I decided to write my own book. And again, I wasn't sure that anybody would be interested in it, but I did get it published by University of Notre Dame Press, and it's done quite well for a book of this type. I mean, it's a serious book. It's not the kind you're going to buy at the supermarket or something, but it did quite well. And so it's sort of one thing led to another. And then after the book, I got invited to give a lot of talks on science and faith around the country. I've given many, many talks, and I think that helped start the Society of Catholic Scientists, because there were, I think, a considerable number of Catholic scientists who probably had read things that I had written for First Things, or heard me speak, or read my book, and so that probably helped in the initial stages of attracting people to the organization. So it was a strange thing. This wasn't, in some sense, planned. It just, as I said, one thing led to another, and so now this is what I'm spending all my time doing. You know?
Yeah, and I remember when you first mentioned the SCS idea to me, when I had you out to University of Mary to give a talk up there on the Catholic faith and evolution.
Right.
And the reason I had you there to talk about that also relates to your work at First Things, which, some of those essays were published in this book, The Believing Scientist.
Yeah.
And for me, when I came across your work, it was like a lightning bolt to my.
Oh, really?
To
was
me.
It this book, Believing Scientist?
It was some of the chapters in this book that were initially published on First Things.
Yeah.
And so some of those are actually required reading for my students.
Oh, wow.
now.
That's nice to know.
But so, tell us a little bit. What got you interested in the subject of evolution? That I think you have a unique perspective. I think you've had some great things to say about it. You tell us about faith and evolution.
Right. Well, it's a kind of funny thing, because I'm not a biologist, and here I am, a physicist writing about evolution. Now, it's not as strange as it may sound, because some of the issues people raise as objections to evolution from a religious point of view actually cross over into physics types of questions. So, for example, some religious people are bothered by the idea that chance is involved in evolution, that mutations are random, and that's really disturbing to a lot of people. So does that mean if these mutations are random, doesn't that mean evolution was a random process? Does that mean God didn't know what he was doing, or was not in control of it? It's just sort of a big crapshoot or casino or something. But you see, the same question arises in physics, because the formation of the Earth, the formation of our galaxy, was the result of processes in the early universe that were, in some sense, random. There were random fluctuations in the density of matter that eventually led to the formation of our galaxy. And so lots of things happen in physics that are random. We know that in quantum mechanics, certain processes are, according to quantum mechanics, random. And so the same issue arises. A theological question arises. What are the role of chance in the world, whether it's physics or biology? So as I say, they're really, the theological questions are not that arise with evolution, arise with regard to certain physics ideas too. So that's why I am writing about a biological issue here. So my perspective is probably a little different from a lot of people who write about evolution. Why did I write about it? Well, actually, that wasn't a main. Evolution was actually never a main focus in my own thinking growing up, or it's not something that ever was much of gave me any pause or difficulty in my own thinking as I was growing up. And so, in fact, my book, Modern Physics and Ancient Faith, doesn't talk about evolution. It talks about entirely other things. But I saw that a lot of people, because a lot of people, it is a big issue for a lot of people, especially in the United States. I felt I ought to say something about that and give my thoughts on the subject. And so I have written articles and given talks about it, like at University of Mary. But as I said, it was not something that really was a personal issue for me. Maybe I should clarify. One reason I got into writing about science and faith to begin with was not actually was that in my own life, starting from when I was a teenager, a young teenager, I had a lot of questions about aspects of the faith or aspects of science and how they fit together. So there were a lot of questions in my own mind of how to integrate a scientific picture of the world with the picture that our faith gives us of the world. And so I was thinking through a lot of questions for my own benefit. Okay, and so over the years, I'd worked out a lot of things, and I'd read widely on the questions that interested me. I'd looked into them, and so by the time I was in middle age, I had sort of had a lot of what I thought reasonable answers to a lot of questions, primarily the ones I would ask myself. And so that's why I thought, well, there are other people struggling with some of these questions, and maybe I could help them by, you know, telling them some of the answers that I'd worked out or some of the insights that I had that I thought might make it easier for them to think these things through. And so that's how I got into writing. And it's, as I said, it's not an accident that my first book was largely about physics-related questions because I'm coming from that direction. But I, of course, also thought about evolution for many years, and so when I got to writing articles and so forth, I ended up and reviewing books. I ended up reviewing books about that and writing articles about that too. So anyway, so that's how I ended up on this subject of evolution.
So one of the great insights that I first gained from reading your work was this distinction between primary and secondary
Right.
causes.
Yeah.
If we want to get into one
Sure.
of these particular sources of struggle for people trying to integrate faith and science.
Yeah. At some point, I came to realize that this is a question that even transcends evolution. I think a fundamental reason that people have difficulty reconciling faith and science or seeing how they fit together is that they're making a fundamental error in their thinking, or they're missing a fundamental insight. And that is, they're thinking of God as if he's just a sort of another player in the world, on the same playing field as natural causes. And so they think of God as the explanation of something, and scientific explanations of things as competing explanations. It's God or science. It's a natural explanation, or you have a religious explanation, as if they're in competition with each other. And I think this is the root of really the whole problem, where people think science and faith are in conflict with each other. And what they're not understanding is the Christian notion of how God relates to the world. God is not a part of the world. He's not another force like electricity or gravity in the world. God is not a part of the world, an actor in the world in the same way you and I are, or electrons and gravitational fields are. God is the creator of the world. He's the author. And the analogy that has always been helpful to me is that God is to the universe as the author of a novel is to the novel. He's the author of the universe. And this is not a modern idea or my idea. This goes back to the earliest days of Christianity, where the church fathers said that God wrote two books, the book of the scriptures and the book of nature, or they sometimes said the book of the universe. And we could learn about God from either of his books. But if you think about what the relation of the author to the novel, it actually helps clarify many issues. So, for example, If I always use this question to audiences if I talk about evolution, or even if I talk more generally about science and faith. I say, so take a novel like The Hobbit. In The Hobbit, there's a character, Smaug the dragon, and there's another character, Bard the bowman, and Bard the bowman kills the dragon by shooting him with an arrow. And so then what I do is I ask the audience, what was the cause of the dragon's death in The Hobbit? Was it that the dragon was shot by an arrow by Bard the bowman, or did Smaug the dragon die because Tolkien wrote the book that way? And then most of the time the audience will laugh because they see the absurdity of having to choose between those. That on the one hand, on one level, the death of the dragon has a cause within the plot of the novel, and the cause is that Bard the bowman shot him with an arrow. So that's the cause within the book's plot. But at a completely different level, the dragon died because Tolkien wrote the novel that way. And Tolkien is the cause of there being a novel. He's the cause of there being characters in the novel, Bard the bowman and the dragon. He's the cause of the fact that the bowman shot the dragon, that the dragon died from that, and so on. He's the cause of everything, of all the events in the novel and their causal relationships within the plot. And so he is the cause of causes, as it were. But they're not in competition. The fact that Tolkien is the cause in no way diminishes Bard the bowman as the cause on another level. And so that, once people realize that, they realize science is talking about causes within the plot of the universe. There are cause-effect relations within the plot of the universe. That's what scientists study. But God is not a cause within the universe in that way, any more than Tolkien is a character in The Hobbit. And so, as I say, Gandalf or Frodo walking around in Middle-earth is not going to bump into Tolkien. He's not a character, he's not in Middle-earth. He's not a character in the novel. And we're not walking around to bump into God. God is outside, in a sense, the universe. He's the cause of it. And I think once people understand this very basic Christian conception, a lot of science faith questions sort of evaporate. So did this crocodile or giraffe or hippo, is it the result of a sequence of causes within the plot of the universe, like reproduction and evolution and the things that biologists like you study? This hippo is there because its parents reproduced. It caused that hippo, as did the whole chain of evolution. Or because God wrote the universe with that hippo in its plot. Both. And the latter is God's creation. He created the hippo, but the hippo also arose to evolution. What's the conflict there? But it's not just that question, but really the whole science faith being in conflict is thinking that you have to choose between God as an explanation of something and natural explanations of things. And so it's God versus nature. That's what the science versus religion conflict is about. You're pitting God against nature, which is absurd from a Christian point of view, because God causes nature. He is the cause of nature. He's not a competitor with nature. So anyway, I'm rambling on too long, I suppose, but this is so central, and you can see this isn't just something that arises with evolution. It arises with many questions coming from physics and just generally from science.
Yeah. So the question is it's not whether God or nature did it. It's did God do it or God's nature do it? The nature the natural world that He created.
Right. I mean, so God, there are things that happen that God causes in the world that are not simply the consequence of natural processes. So when Jesus turns water into wine, there's not a physics or chemistry explanation of that. Mm-hmm. It would be, so if you think of the laws of physics, and I'm coming at things from a physics point of view, one way to think of the laws of physics is, again, using the novel analogy, is that you could think of the laws of physics maybe as the grammar grammatical rules in which the words and the sentences of the novel are written. And so the author has the choice of writing grammatical sentences throughout his novel, but the author also has the power to write sentences that are not grammatical. And maybe there's a reason why that would be, from a literary point of view, he might want to have an ungrammatical sentence in there.
As in poetry.
Well, maybe as in poetry, or just so God doesn't have to. Most events in the universe follow these laws, which are God's laws. So just as an author can say, well, will I write in English and follow the laws of English grammar, or will I write in Russian and follow Russian grammar, or what? I mean, the author can choose what rules to follow. And in the same, or if he's writing poetry, shall I write it in iambic pentameter? Should I write it in this other metrical scheme? Should I be a sonnet? Should it be, what is the structure of what I'm writing? So God chooses these rules and laws that structure the universe, but he doesn't have to stick to them. So if he wants to have an event happen that is contrary to the patterns and the rules and the laws that apply everywhere else in the universe, he's free to do so. And so there can be miraculous events like that. But God isn't, see, many people think that if it is God or nature, that where do you find God? Well, this thing has a natural explanation, so God's not involved. Because that's all explained by the science. Oh, here's something that science can't explain. Oh, that must be God. And so God is relegated to only the supernatural. So there's the natural events, and here's this. But God is the author of the whole novel, the whole universe, of the supernatural things and the natural things. And so, yes, if Christ turns water into wine, that is God acting in a way which has no natural explanation. But the natural events happening around us are equally caused by God. And they follow the rules that he has laid down. But he's equally the cause of them. So we should look for God. The early Christians did not, when they were talking to pagans who did not believe in a creator, the early Christian writers, the church fathers, the great theologians of the early church, did not point to miracles when they're talking to non-believers. They pointed to the order of nature. They pointed to nature as pointing to God, not to the supernatural phenomena. So that's very important. God is, all things that happen in the universe are part of God's work, and all things point to God. The whole order of nature is pointing to God. And so this is something many people have forgotten.
One question that comes up sometimes when talking about secondary causes, and I think part of this is a problem with our perspectives about time, is this question of deism. So sometimes people hear that and they think of God acting through secondary causes in a deistic manner, where God is sort of at the Big Bang, and that's where things unfold from, and everything else is sort of like the pool balls hitting each other after that time.
Yeah, because again, the same root problem, because they don't see how God, if something's happening according to the rules, then God's not involved in that. It's happening by a natural process, so where God isn't in that. They see God as only doing something when things depart from the rule, when there's a miracle. And so they say, well, maybe when the universe began, maybe that had to be miraculous, but God then set it in. But once it was set in motion, then it's humming along on its own, like a machine. It doesn't need God's help anymore, and God can go off and go fishing or something, and the universe will carry on by itself. This is what they're also overlooking, and maybe I should have started with this, is an even more basic Christian idea, Jewish and Christian idea. The most fundamental thing God does is he gives the world being. He makes there be a world at all. And that's not something that just happened at the beginning. And again, the novel analogy, which is very useful from many points of view, if I'm asking what was Tolkien's role in the novel, was it that he started it off at the beginning? If you want to say where was Tolkien active, do you only go back to the first sentence of the Lord of the Rings or the first sentence of The Hobbit? Say, oh, that was Tolkien creating the Lord of the Rings or creating the Hobbit. No. Actually, the first sentence is, the first word is not particularly relevant. That's the beginning of the novel. It's not the source or origin of the novel. It's not the explanation of why there is a novel. If you ask what's the beginning of The Hobbit, it's a particular sentence that comes first in its sequence of words. But if you say, what is the cause of The Hobbit as a novel? It's the mind of Tolkien. And he is the cause, he's the cause of every part. He has created out of nothing, as it were, brought into being as a work of art, the entire novel. He is responsible for the fact that there's a novel rather than there not being a novel. And so what God does what creation means in a Christian context is God brings forth from his own mind, as it were. He thinks up the whole universe. He gives and makes it into a real universe. It's not just a possible universe. It's not just a hypothetical universe. It's not a fictitious universe. It's an actual, real universe. And what is giving it that reality? What is making it real? What's making it have being? It's God's creative power. And he is equally creating us right now speaking. Why? Because we have being. We're real. And God, in that reality, that being that we have is coming from God. And so when we say in the Creed, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of all things. He is creating this pen. This is a thing. He's a creator of all things. God is right now making this to be a real pen, having being. He is in an image from the book of Hebrews. It says, God holds all things holds things by the word of his power. He is holding the world in existence. He is giving it reality. If God were to cease doing that, the universe would vanish like a dream, you know? And so that's what people, I think in the modern world, who have lost sight of basics of Christian belief, don't understand. That's what deists didn't understand back in the 1700s. And they thought, somehow the universe can come along on its own. It doesn't, if it's following the rules like a machine, then God's not playing a role. Well, yes, he is. He's making that to be a real universe. He's giving it reality. And so God is needed even when everything's going along according to the rules he laid out. And so, because they couldn't see that, and they thought God would somehow own, the universe to sort of exist on its own, and that maybe God would only be needed at extraordinary moments, like when the universe began or if a miracle happened. And otherwise he could go away on vacation and let the universe run on its own, like you might let a computer program run overnight or something like that. But that's so fundamentally misunderstanding the idea of the Christian idea of God's relationship to the world. It's kind of, this is what motivated me to write, because as I looked around and saw so many people wrestling with what are essentially pseudo problems. There was so much writing, and not just by atheists. So much of what atheists write, so much of what fundamentalist Christians write, actually, is based on complete misunderstandings of what Christian tradition has said about these things. And they're wrestling with what are essentially pseudo problems, and that sort of evaporate once you grasp certain very basic points. So that sort of motivated me. That motivated me to some extent. I was getting tired of watching people going through so much difficulty for no reason. You know, they could have been spared a lot of their.
Right.
Yeah.